Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, it's the definitive podcast to help you grow as a leader, help you grow yourself, your company, your team, and impact the people and the world around you. So I'm very excited today. I always bring in just these amazing guests and people that have fantastic backgrounds and experiences in leadership and management and entrepreneurship. And today is by far no different. And here's what's awesome is she's like right across town from me. We're sitting here chatting. I am bringing on today Dr. Renee Moorfield, PhD. She's the co-founder and CEO of WisdomWorks. It's a social enterprise that makes the science of human thriving practical for leaders, for teams, and for international brands. She's accelerating positive impact. Her and her team draw on their core brand, which is Be Well, Lead Well. It's a science-based platform of assessments and education. It helps people grow and lead. And so with that, I bring to you Renee Moorfield. Good afternoon, Renee. Thanks for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here, and you're right. It was so funny to find out that we're about 5 miles apart.
I know.
And yet we're on StreamYard.
Absolutely. We were talking right beforehand. I was like, man, I really should set up a studio and start having folks over and sit and have these conversations. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you do me a favor and just first off, take a couple of moments and share with the audience kind of who you are, what your background is in leadership. And then let's get into talking a little bit about your company and leadership and thriving as a leader, especially right now today.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll give you a little career background. I started as an exercise physiologist, and so I was always focused on what would it take to bring more physical activity in our lives, to eat in such a way that really supported our well-being. So I did that early on with heart patients and realized in that process that I didn't want to be working with people necessarily after the fact, after they had a heart attack, but preferred to work with them up front early on so that we were living in ways that we could support our own well-being and the way that we were in the world. And I quickly started working with a global IT company in Dallas, Texas, EDS, for those people who know electronic data systems, now owned by Hewlett Packard, and ran their global health and wellness promotion department. And we were really seeing that the people that we saw were those people on the back end that were stressed out employees. This was a company that grew from 41,000 to 110,000 pretty quickly through mergers and acquisitions. And those mergers and acquisitions were done very well technically, but there was not as much thought given to people and culture. So we were seeing a lot of people on the back end that were very stressed out. So early on in my career, this is now 30 years ago, I realized, wow, there is a factor that we're not paying attention to when it comes to how we lead change, how we lead people, how we lead tasks, how we lead teams, and that is the well-being of people themselves and creating a culture where all people can thrive. So I ended up getting a master's in business and then a doctorate in spirituality and leadership, really looking at what's the role of spirituality in one's ability to lead. And by the way, my dissertation found out, or the research we did on that found out that when someone is spiritually centered, no matter how they define it, whether that's a religion, a prayerful practice, a walk in nature, a higher transcendent purpose, no matter what it was, they were more tolerant to diversity. They had lower fasting triglycerides, lower fasting cholesterol. They were more effective as leaders themselves. So that spiritual sensibility as leaders was really important. I ended up leaving EDS and going to the Coca-Cola company, and I was there for a couple of years and learned all about the power of marketing in shaping how we see ourselves as leaders. And after 2 years there, decided that I wanted to start WisdomWorks, co-founded that with my husband, who is still supporting WisdomWorks, but mostly retired and in a great band. And that was 25 years ago. Coca-Cola was one of our first clients. So WisdomWorks was always meant to be focused on thriving leaders, thriving organizations, and the ability for leaders and organizations to amplify thriving in the world. And even how we've designed the company as a social enterprise, we hope really reflects that value of well-being and thriving for people.
That's phenomenal. What a cool journey. And it's amazing to just sit and listen to you and sort of the twists and turns and the things you're like, well, I got this piece and then I really stacked on and built on and added to this piece. And so it's exciting to see how you've evolved as a person and then as a leader. And so I'm curious, one of the things that you talked about and we've brought up is social enterprise. And
Mhm.
right at the very beginning, it's easy for me to let stuff get away from me. So I want to ask, can you define for the audience what is a social enterprise or what is a social business, that construct that you're talking about?
Yeah, and I know today that there are more legal or clearly defined words around this, but
Hmm.
for us, social enterprise meant an organization that, by the very virtue of its work, would give back. And but our legal structure is an incorporation, so
Hmm.
that's what we are legally. But 1% of our gross revenues goes to a nonprofit called Capital Sisters International. It's a unique investment fund that supports microloans for women in developing countries, women who are financially strapped but yet entrepreneurially quite creative. And the money they raise then goes back into their family systems, their communities, so those people can live with human dignity. So it was important to us to make a commitment, not to just give philanthropically, but to have that part of our business engine. And so that for us, for me personally too, would be the definition of a social enterprise.
I think it's fantastic. And I think you keep it simple, right? You're like, hey, here's the virtue of the work is that we give back. And then I think it's great that you have it well defined. And I shared with you a little bit beforehand. I was the chair with one of the companies here in town, or with one of the nonprofits here in town, that was the National Institute for Social Impact. And so we studied social impact businesses. What are the businesses and what is the good that they're creating? So it's not just about profit, but it's also about the power and the people and the benefit that's given back. So I think that's great. Um, the second thing I want you to define for me, how do you define, because like it's easy to look it up in the dictionary, but how do you determine if somebody is thriving? What
Mhm.
is thriving? As we get
Yeah.
into this, thriving as part of the leadership journey.
Yeah. Well, for me, those are two separate questions. What is thriving? How do we define it? And then how do we determine? How do we
Okay.
like invite people to determine where they are?
Sure.
So the way we define thriving is the extent to which you feel internally well resourced. So internally well resourced to deal with all the challenges and demands and complexities that you find yourself in, that life throws at you, and to do so with a high quality of life, a sense of competence and growth. So there's a lot that we can unpack in that definition, but that's
Sure.
how we define thriving, and that's for us how it's a bit different than there's a real focus right now, and very rightly so, after coming out of a couple of years of COVID and all of its impacts.
Oh
There's a
man.
real focus right now on mental emotional well-being, and that's absolutely important to do. And we're saying that that's foundational, and the capacity and thrive also says you feel resourced to deal with all the stressors kind of coming at you. And you can do that in such a way that you are growing as a leader and as a human being through the demands that you face. So that would be what thriving is.
And so what do you see as the link between thriving and how effective a leader is?
There's so in prepping for this, when you and I talked about this question, I
Hmm.
realized there are so many ways to answer this question because just one is from personal experience. You can think about your own life, the times when you did not feel well resourced, when you felt exhausted, when you felt depleted, when you weren't
Stressed.
well rested, when you were stressed, when you found yourself just thrown into um, a situation a crisis that you never expected. So, and how you respond from that place of depletion. So, one level of answering that question is just personally. People can look at their own lives and say, okay, when I show up as a leader from this place of depletion or exhaustion, of course, I'm not going to show up with the best decisions. I'm not
Sure.
going to show up with more broad mindedness and openness. I'm not going to be as open to different people's perspective because I want the situation to stop. I just want to fix it. So those are some immediate links. Um, in some research we've done recently with 841 leaders in different
Hmm.
areas of the world, we were able to show using our assessment, and you and I can talk about the assessment, how we assess thriving later, but
Sure.
we were able to show that those leaders that scored high in their psychological well-being, which included thriving and a number of other factors, also reported high in their leadership impact. In fact, the correlation was so strong that our partner is just down the street from you and I, Mike. It's the
Hmm.
University of Colorado at Colorado Springs.
Hmm.
There's a positive organization center there in the business school, and they've been our partner in helping us develop the assessment and make sure that everything is valid and reliable and tight. So they also do, when we do studies, they help us do all the statistical analysis. And they basically said the correlation between psychological well-being for a leader and the leadership impact is so strong that 34% of a
Wow.
leadership's impact can be attributed to or explained by their well-being. That's big. That's a third.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like a third of you. I mean, that's a third of your impact. That's a third for most people of your production. It's a third of what many people, depending on the business you're in, might be output, right? I mean, your
Totally.
actual results.
I think about
Um,
all the skills, the talents, the relationships, the situations that you bring to bear as a leader to make results happen. Well, include in that about a third of that can be
mhm.
explained by your sense of, do you feel internally well resourced to handle the situation in front of you, and to do that with mental, emotional, physical energy, that kind of a sense of feeling on top of things and well and at one with the world.
So I now I have like two or three questions I want to ask. I just got to figure out the order,
Sure.
right? So I guess I'm going to go with this one first because like when you've brought up several times, hey, do you feel internally well resourced? So like the what I'm hearing you say is like, hey, do I feel good on the inside? Because then I'm able to put that energy out and so forth.
Pretty simple. Yeah.
So when you have somebody, especially in a leadership role, and that radiates out, right? I did a podcast years ago called the Leadership Ripple Effect, and I was talking about, okay, it starts internally here, and as it goes out, it's both for the good and the bad, folks, right? If you're radiating good, you're going to spread more good. If you're radiating crap, it's, well, that's the result too. So can you tell me what are two or three ways that as a leader, if I'm in that role and I'm realizing, man, I feel depleted, I feel stressed, I feel anxious, what are two or three things right off the cuff, Renee, that you would recommend for someone to maybe actions or activities
Mhm.
that they could engage in to start to replenish themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, that person who already has a sense of that
Hmm.
is pretty self aware. So for most people, becoming just aware of that, because for most of us, if we're feeling overstressed or depleted chronically, then that becomes a norm, that becomes a baseline. And we
It's where
think
you
that that is
function.
the baseline from which we function. And
Hmm.
so just to be aware that, wait a minute, there may be something different. I may be to that. That's a level of self-awareness that I would congratulate anybody on. So if they
Good.
found that, I would say some of the best things to do, especially when you find that in the moment. Let's say you're about to do a sales presentation, or you're about to give some feedback to an employee, or something that you notice, wow, my chest feels tight, my jaw is tight, my heart is racing, my breath, I don't think I'm breathing. So some of the best things to do when you notice that is to take a breath. And I know we hear that a lot, kind of in the popular media, but the
Hmm.
breath is one of those things that you come into the world with an inhalation, you leave the world with an exhalation, and
Mm.
every single moment of your life, you have this tool, this resource at your disposal that can help you manage your stress. It can help you manage your energy, and it can optimize how you show up in any situation, including work. I say including work because it also can be the most stressful situations often happen at home, not work,
Right.
right?
Sure.
So the ability just to take a breath and to let that breath support you in becoming more self-regulated instead of dysregulated. Because when we're overstressed, what we're noticing is a level of dysregulation. in our being, in our body. Most people have a signature, a kind of a stress signature that will tell them, okay, this is my pattern. So for me personally, I just named some of mine. Tightness in the chest. That's
Okay.
one of my signals that I'll notice.
I do shoulders, I think, right
Shoulders, you
here.
lift the shoulders
Yeah.
up, you tighten the shoulders.
Yeah.
Well, most everyone will have a pattern that is kind of
Okay.
their go-to physiological, somatic, body pattern. And when they notice that, that is like the signal going, okay, great. My body is giving me feedback right now that I am about to enter this situation in a dysregulated, stressful state. And we know when we're stressed and dysregulated, just like we talked about, we're more likely to contract in our thinking. We're going to use behaviors that we know. We're not going to be open to new things. We're not going to learn as much because we're contracting. So taking a breath. That's to me always the first go-to. Going for a walk is awesome. So just, people will say to me, well, I don't have time to get outside. Every single person has time to take 20 steps around their room. Every single person has time, if possible, to open the door, especially if it's a beautiful day like it is here in Colorado right now,
It
to
sure
go out
is.
and just walk down the road for a second and walk back. 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes. So that ability to just move the body can support. And Mike, I'd love to know if you've had this experience. I certainly have, where I walk down the street. I'm trying to focus on something, trying to fix something, trying to fix up, make a decision on a problem, and I've just stuck. Walk down the street, and I will get the answer somewhere on that walk.
Yeah. Oh, sir. Yeah. It happens all the time.
So moving the body, moving.
Okay.
By the way, both things I've just mentioned were body related. And the reason they are body related, and the reason I haven't mentioned something that's mind related, is because often part of the reason that we're stressed is how the story we're creating around the situation itself. And
Right.
so the idea of using the body to support a different story, different perspectives for
Sure.
showing up. Those would be two big actions I would take. And they're actually very small with big impact. Small actions, big impact.
Small actions, big impact. I love that. And I'm going to share that in the chat right now. Here's what I find is really interesting. So often in leadership roles, we get in there, and because it's sort of, I think from the outside, people expect they're going to have all of the answers, right? And so often then we're looking for, okay, well, what's the answer? And so like asking a question like this, because I'm genuinely curious, I'm saying, okay, well, what are some ways to replenish? And often we think like, well, what's the big answer? And like you said, it's small action, big impact. Breathing. It's interesting, and not to get way off down a sidetrack here, but it's something we take for granted. I got COVID very bad a couple of years ago, and my lungs both collapsed. And so like every moment now I can feel that breath. And so when you say, hey, you have to breathe, it's something that, because we just do it so often, we become numb to it.
Right.
And so when you're bringing it to that forefront and you're bringing it real time, saying, well, just take a step back. If you notice it, like you're a step ahead. And then one, I'm hearing you say, just focus on the breath. That's the best and most powerful thing. And then walking and moving, I've heard this adage before, right? Motion creates emotion. And so when you're saying, it's interesting, you bring up and you're like, hey, I'm talking about these physical things, move the body and get this stuff going, because it does impact what happens here. And if what's happening here is already jacked, right? And again, that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. I love your language, Rennet, because I don't normally say usually jacked. So I love that you're saying it that way.
Well, it just is, I mean, that's real life, right? If you're messed up in the head, you got to do something different. So I love those two. So I don't get too far ahead of it. And I've put this on the screen a couple of times. But for anybody listening to the podcast also later, if you want more information on Renee's company, on Wisdom Works, you can go to wisdom-works.com for more information. We talked also, and I'll share in the show notes some other contact methods. You could also reach out and email Renee at Renee, RENEE, at wisdom-works.com. And then she had mentioned earlier to me, I'll try and put the LinkedIn here up on the screen in a little bit. No, I love it because it's stuff that's so simple. It's so simple and it's so impactful.
So
Here's another,
simple. And Mike, one more thing about the
yeah,
simplicity of it. It's so simple and it's also available. So that's the thing is so many people are looking for the magic pill that's going to
right,
help them feel, okay, now everything's going to be fine. And we're often looking for things that are outside ourselves. Like if I now acquire this or that, I'm finally going to experience the level of thriving or well-being that I want. But
right.
the truth is, the things that really support you showing up well as a leader and a human being are often the things that are available to you right now. But as you just said, they're in the background. And it
Hmm.
isn't until often a crisis happens, like you experienced with COVID,
Hmm.
that you realize, oh my gosh, I have this amazing capacity to breathe. And by the way, I need it to
Yeah,
live.
no
And
kidding.
now, and there are breaths that can help you up level your energy. There are breaths that can help you down regulate. There are breaths that can help you feel balanced. There are thousands of breath types. So
Hmm.
then it gets really complex
Sure.
or nuanced. But the simple thing is just realizing, wow, I have got some power over my own physiology. And I think that feeling of autonomy, the agency, that that
Hmm.
that alone helps all of us feel greater well-being. And then there's a whole host of other simple practices, by the way, we could talk about, but those are the
Sure.
two that first came up.
No, I love it. I love keeping things simple and it's something tangible. People can write it down and you go, hey, I can do this. I've got two other questions, sort of that are intertwined here before we move on to how do you, because you have a way with Wisdom Works, I believe, you and we brought up, internally well resourced. You got to have that high quality of life.
Yep.
How do you measure that? Can
Yeah.
you articulate how do you measure that? I'm sure you have an assessment or something
Sure.
that's really high level, but
Sure, we do have an assessment, but it was born out of just working with leaders over, it's been 35 years now. It's been a long time of either
sure.
being in a leadership role and working with leaders. So, and through that process, asking leaders themselves, what supports you in showing up well as a leader and really thriving as a leader and really supports your well-being and it help from leaders connecting those dots.
Hmm.
After we listened to them enough and brought that into our leadership development work, we decided about 6 years ago to take those qualitative insights and turn it into a scalable assessment tool. And that's why we built a relationship with the University of Colorado in Colorado
Hmm.
Springs to help us build that tool. So the tool is called Be Well, Lead Well, Pulse. You already mentioned the Be Well, Lead Well portion
Hmm.
of our brand.
Be well, lead well,
Pulse is the
pulse.
assessment portion. And what it looks at is 19 psychosocial factors linked to well being and leadership, for leaders. Um, and Interestingly enough, it takes about 20, 25 minutes, 24 minutes, I think, to take for most people.
Okay.
And because we've had about 3,500 now leaders take it around the world, and they never take it on their own. It's usually part of a journey of coaching or leadership development that they are going on. What can I
I
tell
want to
you?
take it. How do I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how do
Yeah,
I get, is that something that,
we can talk about that after this. I
okay.
can I can
Okay.
get you access to the tool, for
I'm
sure, because
interested.
that would be an interesting conversation for you and I to have
Yeah.
together, maybe later after you take
And
it.
anyone else can go to her website, I'm sure, and connect to get more
Yeah,
information on that.
yeah. Yes, there actually is I'm glad you mentioned that, because on the website, if you go to wisdom-works.com, it says assessment, and people will see all the information about Be Well Lead Will Pulse there.
Okay.
What we notice is for most leaders, it's the first time they've ever looked at their well-being, their stress resilience, and their leadership holistically and all together in one place. So that's the uniqueness of the tool, is to in
Sure.
one place look at all these things together and start to see the relationship between these different factors. So it's been doing the kind of work with leaders to really support them in stepping up in their effectiveness through their capacity to thrive has really been a gift. It's really been a gift to do that kind of work.
Oh, that's phenomenal. So is there a common thread through some of that, like the assessment of stuff that you see, like most common that are stressors on a leader's or an entrepreneur's life?
Yeah, yes, and we've got data from high-level executives, middle management, first-line supervisors, so and then self-employed freelancers. So we've got data across the board, and it really depends on the level of leader. So we have most higher-level leaders have more agency in their
Mm-hmm.
work. So we will often see that show up in higher thriving scores.
Okay.
Middle managers, and these are just broad patterns, by the way. This is not
Sure.
every senior leader, but these are broad patterns. Middle managers often will see the most stressed because they are managing up, sideways, down. They're managing 360 because that's the role of a middle manager. And so often we'll see lots of stresses and pressures from that direction.
Sure.
Supervisors, interestingly enough, if they have a higher degree of job autonomy, if they score high in their job autonomy, we'll actually
Hmm.
see some pretty good scores. If they
Okay.
have lower job autonomy, we'll see lower scores in their well-being. Job autonomy is a big deal, and often a frontline leader will be given responsibility, and this can happen in middle management too, but will be given responsibility, but not the autonomy to make the decisions with that responsibility, and that's
Sure.
stressful. That's a stressful
It's
situation.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So let me ask you, because one of the things we've talked a lot about, where you've talked about, supervisory level leaders, middle managers, higher level leaders, CEOs, executives. You mentioned entrepreneurs and so forth. What's the I don't know how I want to word this. I'll keep it really simple. What would you say is the link, or what are the commonalities between management and leadership? Are they often just the same thing, intertwined? Do you definitely view them as a separate sort of role and title? How do you define that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Often, I think those two words are used synonymously, and
Hmm.
sometimes in just talking with someone, I might as well. But the way we actually define it
Hmm.
is management is a title or a specific position where leadership is an internal stance that anybody can take. So everyone can be a leader. It's a stance of saying, I am going to use my life energy toward particular results. And that's a stance of self authoring, saying, I'm going to be the author of how I
Hmm.
show up. It's also a stance of be kind of beyond self authoring, of sort of being more purpose driven, being more internally vision driven, which are, by the way, another factor that's part of our tool, vision and purpose.
Hmm.
Is something that we measure, and you can start to really see the difference between leadership qualities
Hmm.
and a management role. You can have a very high level manager
Yes.
who still um, isn't showing leadership qualities. They've been put in a role, and they may have um, some of the external factors of management in place because of their title and role, but they don't have necessarily that internal sense that they want to use their life energy to really benefit people, the planet, positive results, etc. So those for us are two very different. And you can have a entrepreneur or a frontline supervisor who may not have a high level management role, but is absolutely a leader. You can feel it when you're with them
It's
that
that
they
aura and that the charisma, I think, that comes with it is something that's
and they
definitely a
take
big thing.
responsibility. They take
Yeah.
responsibility for who they are and kind of how they're showing up.
So now I'm going to turn to this other direction. I have this one question I'm going to ask you before we're done. I'm circling it on my paper
Sure.
because I wrote it down, but
Okay.
I'm just not going there yet. So
Okay.
what are the top 3 to 5 leadership qualities that stand out that you say that makes this person a leader?
Well, I'm going to draw from some of what we've learned through working with leaders, but also
Yep.
through some of the assessment data, because we're learning a lot through that. A clear vision and purpose to guide one's life and work is a pretty when someone shows up with a vision and purpose to guide their life and work, and I'm not talking about the organization's vision and purpose, and I'm not talking about a team's vision and purpose. I'm talking Mike, what is the vision and purpose that guides you as a human being? And your role as a manager allows you to express that. It's a place to play, but
Love that.
you are the one, you feel secure in yourself because of this vision and purpose. If someone scores high in that, they likely will score higher in the other factors of well-being. So I would say that's one of the most critical ones.
Okay.
The other one that is showing up really powerful, we have a whole dimension. It's actually got 3 scales in it, but I'm going to talk about it as a whole dimension. It's called wonder.
Okay.
And wonder meaning that sense of curiosity, that sense of openness, the sense of not just tolerating diversity, but seeking it, seeking points of view that are different than your own. I think that openness to new experience is a pretty fundamental factor to leading, because it means that you are able to show up without all the answers. You
Right.
know, you kind of realize that in the complex world that we're living in, most of us as individuals don't have all the answers. We actually need each other. We need teams to
100%.
come together. So that ability to show up with that sense of awe, that sense of appreciation, that curiosity, and the ability to seek perspectives that are different than your own. That's a pretty big factor as well.
I think those are both really powerful. Just that vision. I love the way you stated that vision and purpose to guide your life, and then having that sense of wonder and seeking diversity and leaning on others. I love. I really like the way you put both of those, and I think that's very, very powerful. So one thing, I'm going to go back in time for something you said a little bit ago, because you were saying, as when you have somebody that is internally well resourced and they're thriving, and you said, you can correct me if I'm wrong exactly how I say this, but you said that'll make a leader's impact up to 34% more impactful or more effective, was what you said, I think, right?
No, what I said was, when a
Okay.
leader says, here's the impact I've made, 34% of that can be explained by
Gotcha.
their sense of psychological well-being. So
Got it.
that's what our research showed.
So that leads me to 2 questions then. One is, how do you measure that leadership impact? And question 2, you could answer these in either order. Like, how do you measure the impact, right? So you know that that's the thriving piece, but then how do you measure thriving for that leader to know that those are correlating into, the thrive is driving the impact, and they continue to impact, and so therefore they're thriving. It seems like a little bit of a circle, but
Yeah.
can you answer those 2 for me?
Sure. So embedded in our tool, I mentioned our 19 factors, and without going through all 19, because that would take all of our time together, 3 of those factors are linked to what we call thriving amplified.
Okay.
And so that's the ability of a leader to energize others, energize and inspire people, to maximize the potential, the effectiveness, the growth of others. So that's energize, maximize, and to cultivate an environment of what we would call pro-social behaviors: collaboration, care, appreciation, etc. So sort of the glue that makes for kind of a workplace that people want to work in, because you
Sure.
feel better when you're there. You feel
Right.
better, you leave, and you feel great about your work you've done, all that. So that kind of environment. So those are 3 scales that we measure underneath Thriving Amplified. So that's how we were measuring leadership impact, is the extent to
Okay.
which they made that kind of impact on people. So I will say the impact is on people in this kind of situation.
Gotcha. Okay.
More of a transformational leadership style
Sure.
is what we were looking at. And then the other 16 factors, some of which I've mentioned to you: vision and purpose, seeking new perspectives, awe and appreciation. We have a whole category, resilience. We haven't talked about that. We have a whole category called fuel, which looks at eating, moving, resting, and breathing. So 4 different wellness behaviors, and the extent to which you use those to manage your stress and your energy and optimize your performance. So all 16 of those we bring together, and we say, we're going to create an overall psychological well-being score with that. And then we looked at those 2, the extent to which, when one went up, what happened with the other, etc. So, and that was the statistical work that we did with University of Colorado, which was super helpful. So that's how we measured kind of thriving overall. And then Thriving Amplified.
No, I love how I love how you explain all of this. Like, because to me, then it makes sense. And I love how, and obviously this is one of those things, like there's no replacement for experience. When I'm interviewing someone like you, Renee, like how passionate you are about it and the depth of knowledge, like you said, hey, I have 35 years doing this. And it's just like, it's awesome to just sit and listen to you explain it, because it's just awesome.
Well,
I'm
that's
trying
good
to
to hear
think of the
because
word.
I think that, this topic in a way can be very complex because there are so
Uh-huh.
many factors we're finding. But when you get down to the simplicity of it, it is how internally well resourced do you feel to meet all the demands in your life and work with a sense of high quality of life, competence, and growth. That's sort of the
Hmm.
simple, very simple question,
Yeah.
um, that brings it all down to, oh, yeah, if I even just looked at that on a one to 10 scale, like how would I rate myself today on
Sure.
that? Even
Well,
that, not using our assessment, just use that question and rate it on a scale. And if you can say 7 or above, then you're doing pretty darn well. You're feeling like pretty good. If you are 3 or below right now, if the number that came into your mind,
mhm.
whoever's listening to this came into
Sure.
their mind and they said 3 or below, then it's probably time to look at what support you might need, what support that you can get to really help yourself.
Well, and so that leads me to a question, because you had sent me some stuff in our initial email exchange to talk about, and
Yeah.
that was something I for sure wanted to get to and ask, is because you said early on too. I said, well, what should somebody do, to replenish themselves? But I think even prior to that, because you said, hey, if they're asking that, like you're already ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Well, what are some key factors? What are some key things that a leader should be paying attention uh, to know if they are, what are some key factors or some other
Yeah.
key questions that leaders should ask themselves to know
Yes.
where they're at on that scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what comes to mind first, I'm going to start with the body again because we
Okay.
talked about that earlier. So, really paying attention to um, aches and pains in the body that are not from an injury that you just got. Like, you were on your bicycle and you had a bike wreck. Okay, well, there's going to be some aches and pains from that. I've done that. And
Sure.
so there's some aches and pains from that. But um, different signals that you're getting from your body of places where there are contraction, places where there is a sense of kind of flatness or numbness, places where there are tightness. So just checking in with the body to know. So those are great signals, in the moment signals that can
Okay.
support. Um, Physical health, obviously biometrics. So long term, we've got biometrics that can really help us know how we're doing, how our cholesterol is, how our cortisol levels, really checking the cortisol levels. That's a great one. But those are harder to do because you got to go somewhere to make that
Right.
happen. Emotionally, noticing how you are showing up in situations at work and also at home. So this is not just really about work. We're whole people. We're
Sure.
not just talking about being a manager or a leader. We're whole people. So noticing, do you feel like you're depersonalizing things in your language? You're not feeling connected to people. You're showing up with a low affect, sort of a low mood, just kind of
Hmm.
general low mood. Are you feeling like that you're angry or resentful all the time? Are you blowing up more? So just noticing what are those, and then what are the ripple effects of those emotions? What are the ripple effects? Because sometimes it's hard, even for myself, and I've been doing this work for so long, sometimes it's
Hmm.
hard to know for myself what's going on until I see the effect on, say, my husband, or the effect on a team member, on another person. And then you realize, oh, wow, that's not how I wanted to show up. That's not my commitment to being a leader. Most of the people we work with truly want to do good. They
Oh, I
really,
agree.
they really want to do good. And I actually think most people who step in the role of manager, they do it because they feel like They have something to offer and they want to make lives better. They want to get results, of course, but they
Sure.
want to do it in a way that makes lives better and
Hmm.
hopefully the planet better as well. So starting to notice how the way you're showing up is rippling, is affecting other people. Is your team, can people in your team speak out loud if they've got something to say? Are all voices heard? Is there a feeling of camaraderie on the team, or is there internal competition that's not helping the team? So noticing those effects can also be helpful. That's a few things. And then I would go to mentally, clarity of cognition, the ability to focus, feeling fragmented in your thinking, feeling like, wow, my brain just feels like it's in fuzz right now, which we kind of
Hmm.
all felt in the middle of COVID. So
Yeah.
these are some of the signs. I've kind of gone through mental, emotional, physical, and I guess in the spiritual camp, I'd put if you feel like you're lacking purpose or your job is lacking meaning, you're not sure, am I making a difference here? Like, what am I doing? Why am I here? What am I doing with my life? These are kinds of questions that, by the way, can feel heavy and are actually so important for people to be asking to live a
Sure.
fulfilling life and to show up well as a leader, is to ask these kinds of deeper questions.
Well, and I think you know, it's really powerful when you explain it like that. It's
Hmm.
really powerful because I think a lot of times too, we get, we're caught up in that day-to-day rat race and we think, oh, well, I'm just stressed. Oh, well, it's just work. Oh, well, and like when you slow down and you're breaking it down in that manner, you realize, well, really the important, and one of the things, what I heard you say was like, hey, listening to your body, if I've got aches and pains showing up that aren't normal, that's not normal for me,
Hmm.
that it could be underlying something else. I won't give them in the exact same order because the other things that I heard, I would say biometric is at least that's for me. But I heard, because that's something you can do without getting anyone else involved, listening to your body emotionally. How do you show up? And then the other thing that I heard that I think is so powerful and it's so valuable is that you have to listen to others. Like when we're doing all this as leaders, because when I asked you the question, I just said, hey, what are some key factors people should pay attention to? And it's like, you really do have to be introspective. I've got to take the time to listen to myself. I've got to take the time to listen to the people that I'm trying to impact. So often, like you said, oh, well, we think we got these answers and we're trying to grow these other people. But a lot of times they have the answers for us. We're showing up. They're willing to show up and tell us. We just have to be willing to listen and be a little bit vulnerable maybe in the moment.
Well, that's
Does
another great step. You were talking about what are the things that you can do, like
Mhm.
kind of that are we call them micro practices. What are the micro practices you can do that you can make a shift in the moment?
Mhm.
That what you just named is one of the, we would call it a macro practice. And that is the ability, if you're not sure the extent to which you don't really know the impact you're having, that your leadership is having, the way you're showing up is having on others, is to choose a handful of trusted people, people who you know will give you honest feedback and they have your highest and best at heart. So, really selecting those people thoughtfully,
Sure.
but then asking them for feedback, just asking them that question, because I can get 100% of the time, 100% of the time, people will want to give you feedback with great care and thoughtfulness and concern and support for you. And it is enlightening to get that kind of feedback from other people. It really does tell you a lot, not just about um, things that you can change, but usually mostly about what you are doing really well, the way that you are affecting people really well. This is another pattern, Mike, that we
Mhm.
see across all leaders, no matter what level of management, is how many leaders are really committed to what I would call a transformational style of leadership or servant leadership.
Mhm.
And they are so committed to that that they forget their own well being. So they will
So
continue
true.
caregiving, they will continue caring outward. And that's, of course, important. That this, leadership, we said the definition is how do I want to use my life energy to affect positive results? So this is an energy out. But then they forget this vessel, this leader, this person also has to be refueled and,
Mhm.
and has to have the reserves to do that. So usually when you ask people for feedback, you will find that they say, you know, you're awesome. You really inspire me. I feel like I can leave work and refreshed. And they'll say all these wonderful things. So then why are you still feeling depleted? So then you see a disconnect between what you're giving out and how you're supporting yourself.
That's a perfect segue for we're kind of coming down to the tail end, and I love that the way you're sharing it is I how I hear it is it's like, well, as a person I can't pour from an empty cup,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it, with that thought in mind, what shifts and what activities should leaders be involved in to really make thriving a priority? What are some things that they can do to pour into themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And on the personal level, if they know, so obviously we love it when people take our assessment,
Hmm.
mainly because, and this is not just to plug the assessment, by the way, but or
Sure.
some assessment, something that helps them in a very non-judgmental, compassionate way. And the non-judgmental, compassionate is really important, by the way, because most of us grew up with an idea about management that that we need to make a grade, we need to excel at certain things, and that if we don't, those are our weaknesses, and we need to shore up all our weaknesses. So being able to be in a situation using an assessment tool and maybe working with a coach where you can, in a non judgmental way, start to look at your life overall and the extent
Mhm.
to which you're thriving is a wonderful step forward. And to figure out what are those practices that are going to really support you the most. You and I mentioned a couple in the moment that can really support people, the breath work, the movement, but certainly eating as fuel. How do we use our nutrition and how we eat to really support us? Bringing that sense of awe and appreciation in our life and work is important. Having a vision and purpose, so usually that's a first starting place for people, is getting really clear on what they want for their life and work. So those are a couple of things, but the starting place is to create the space in which you can explore your life and leadership much more holistically and non-judgmentally.
Love that. Well, we're right at about the 45-minute mark, a little bit over that. So, couple of things. First off, for anybody that's been listening, thank you so much, Renee, because like just a wealth of knowledge, and you have a lot of really awesome tools to be able to contribute. You shared so many different insights, and I'll make sure and put that all together in show notes. I usually do a blog on Friday and such, and like I said, I'll send you the links to that. I'll send that out to my audience as well. Um, for people that want to connect with Renee, you can go to wisdom-works.com, get more information on her company, on what she does, on taking an assessment, on, where do you start? Some of the things we talked about. And you could certainly send her an email to renee@wisdom-works.com. Whoops, that was on there really quick, but I also said it. Then connect on LinkedIn. Any final thoughts to take us out with today? I mean, you've had so much just guidance and wisdom and information to share. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the same thing. My final thoughts is really actually a feeling, and it's more of one of gratitude and appreciation for what you're doing to
Thank you.
support leaders in really thinking about their lives and not how to just grow other people, but how to grow ourselves. So thank you for your podcast and your great questions today. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I agree. I always have a good time. I say to everybody, I learned so much from sitting and chatting with people. I appreciate it. If you want to hang out for just a
Sure.
moment, and I will go ahead and take us out. And that, my friends, is going to bring us to a close of another Leadership Toolkit episode. Make sure that you share this with Renee Moorfield. Make sure and share this episode. I know that you know somebody, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody in your circle that could gain some insight and get a lot out of the information that she has shared today. So just click that share button. Make sure and throw some thumbs up. That's how we continue to grow the show. You can tune in on Spotify, tune on Apple iTunes, and certainly I'm on YouTube and all the other platforms. Share the Leadership Toolkit with a friend, because what we really want to do is impact leaders, impact their lives, help them grow, and impact their business and the people that are around them. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in and joining me today. Appreciate you. Until we speak next, stay great.